Hello and welcome to News Center. I'm Parikshit Luthra. In what could cast a shadow over India-US diplomatic ties, American prosecutors have charged an Indian national in connection with an assassination plot against a Sikh separatist leader. Further, America says that an Indian government official was directing the plot. US has refrained from sharing the name of the intended target and only highlighted that the person in question is a US citizen who runs a pro-Khalistan organization that has been banned by India. Now, this comes days after reports indicated that US authorities foiled a murder plot against Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, head of the Sikhs for Justice organization in the United States. The organization was banned in 2019 in India, and India has also responded to the charges, saying that the allegations raised by America are a matter of concern. Speaking to reporters at a press conference in Dubai, MEA spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said that such acts are contrary to the Indian government's policy. Joining us now to take this discussion forward is Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate at Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Michael Kugelman, Director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Michael, if I were to begin with you, India and US have always spoken about how we share democratic values. US is the world's oldest democracy and India is the largest democracy coming together. We want to shape the world order. How does an incident like this impact the relations between the two countries?
Well, certainly this is serious business in the sense that not in the last 2 decades, but in many earlier decades, particularly during the Cold War period, the U.S. and India had some difficult times, but they had never experienced something quite like this in terms of the seriousness of this allegation that the U.S. government has leveled on India. I don't think that the relationship will be deleteriously impacted in a big way, in the sense that there's been such exponential levels of growth in relations over the last 2 decades, given the trust and the goodwill in the relationship, and given in particular the strong strategic convergences, particularly around the issue of working together to counter China. Those reasons suggest to me that the two sides, or should I say the relationship, has built up enough insulation to withstand a potential shock like this. However, all that said, I think that for U.S. officials in Washington, they're having to grapple with this possibility that India, a key strategic partner, carried out an assassination on U.S. soil, which again is something unprecedented, certainly in the context of U.S.-India relations, but also in the context of U.S. relations with other top partners. And we'll see what happens in the days and weeks ahead. If there's pressure that builds on the Biden administration from the American public, from Capitol Hill, to take a stronger stand against India for this, now that could put the administration in a tough place. But I do think that eventually things will smooth out and the relationship will be okay. But, at least in the immediate term, it is a pretty significant development.
Right. There's a major difference, Raymond Vickery, between Canada and the United States. In the case of Canada, these are allegations made by Justin Trudeau. The Canadian government has shared that this evidence has been shared with Indian counterparts at the highest level. But in the case of the United States, there is an indictment which has been opened up in a US court. There are legal documents to that effect. What will be the implications if this indictment moves forward, this case moves forward against the Indian national? Perhaps in the days to come, we will hear of more evidence, more involvement of Indian officials as well.
Well, thanks for having me, Parikshit, and it's a pleasure to be on with my good friend, Michael Kugelman. I think that you have to start from the premise that India and the United States are really the two greatest democracies on the face of the earth. There really is no problem that doesn't need the joint attention and cooperation of India and the U.S. Because we share democratic values. We have strategic interests, which are the same vis-a-vis China and so forth. We have interest across the board. So this is an extremely important relationship for two democracies. Now, one of the problems that democracies have is how do they deal with and control covert operations. In the United States, we've had extensive problems with that. They were so extensive back in the 60s and 70s that finally President Ford had to sign an executive order saying that no political assassination could be carried out by any U.S. agent or employee. So India is facing that. We're facing it. That having been said, this court case is going forward. In our system, the executive does not control law enforcement. If U.S. laws are broken, and certainly attempted murder against a U.S. citizen would be a breach of American law, the case is going to go forward. So that's going to present difficulties. You indicated that the person who was to be killed has not been identified. New York Times has published a piece giving his name and giving an interview. So it will continue from there, because this is not like the Canadian situation in which unsubstantiated allegations are made in Parliament as a political matter. So one hopes that what will happen here is that these two great democracies will come together behind the scenes and work this out, so that our basic relations, as Michael has said, will not be significantly impacted. But it is certainly a matter of concern, and one which has to be addressed together by both nations.
Right. Michael, it's quite clear that the U.S. has taken this issue very, very seriously. We've seen the CIA director taking this issue up with the Indian government, according to the Washington Post. Also, the National Security Advisor, Mike Sullivan, has taken up this issue. We also hear from the White House that the matter was raised at the highest bilateral levels very recently. Why is this important for the U.S. government? And the fact is, even if we may sort out differences diplomatically, the legal case will continue as it is.
Right. This is very true. That as we understand from recent media reports, that the very highest levels, including up to President Biden, messages have been conveyed to India at the highest levels. And as I understand it, the message had been similar across all of these engagements, and that is that above all else, the U.S. is very concerned about about this, and beyond that, it's important that something like this not happen again. And I think that as Ray noted before, the way in which the U.S. has gone about this has been very different from the way in which Canada has gone about it, which is another reason why I think that the U.S.-India relationship will come out just fine, in the sense that conventional channels were used, right? I mean, U.S. officials took up the matter privately with their counterparts in India. Nothing was made public, though I do think it is notable. It is important to highlight that the context of the indictment were leaked several days before the indictment was actually unsealed. I mean, the Financial Times and some other Western media outlets had come out with some of the information, which raises some interesting questions. But indeed, again, as Ray had said before, the indictment as laid out, the allegations as laid out, would suggest a significant breach of U.S. law. So it makes perfect sense, and is indeed necessary for the legal case to be taken forward by the U.S. Court system. And I think we'll see in the days ahead, if more details come out. I think that gauging how India's government reacts and responds, particularly in public messaging, I think that'll be pretty significant in terms of looking at how the relationship will play out. To this point, my understanding is that public responses from the Indian government to these allegations have been not denying what happened, but also being very vague, very different from its reaction to the Canadian allegations, which were essentially vociferous denials throughout. So indeed, I think that we'll see how things play out in the days ahead as the legal process plays out. But indeed, this is a very serious issue, just because we're talking about very serious allegations that would indeed amount to breaking U.S. laws on serious levels.
Right. Raymond Vickery, from your experience, how far do you think the U.S. government would want to take this? As we've been discussing, they've not taken this matter lightly at all. They may be dealing with it privately, but it's being taken up very seriously on a day-to-day basis. What kind of accountability or responsibility would they want from India as an ally?
Well, I think that you have to look at the government of the United States not just as a single actor. This is, as in India, it's not one person, it's not one Joe Biden who determines these things. It will be taken up very seriously. And as Michael points out, the responsiveness and the attitude, both publicly and privately, that the government of India takes will be key. I have no doubt that this administration, the Biden administration, the U.S., is all in on the U.S.-India relationship. We've seen that with the welcoming of Prime Minister Modi in the summer. We've seen it at the G20. There's no question that the United States will want to have this resolved. That having been said, again, as Michael has pointed out, and as I've said, this is now a court case. This is not something which is going to be swept under the rug, but what connections will actually be made and be made publicly. We already have a defendant, and how it goes forward from there is largely in the hands not only of the U.S. but India, and we hope that that this will be resolved. I think the administration certainly wants that.
Right.
And bipartisan support for the relationship is in Congress and across the board in the United States.
Right. Michael, if I were to ask you a bit about the court proceedings and how they will follow, if we were to read the press statement from the Department of Justice, they speak about an indictment. They speak about the charges that have been filed by the U.S. attorney against the Indian national Nikhil Gupta, who was working on the directions of an Indian government employee who has not been named in the indictment. The charges have not been filed against him directly, but that Indian government employee has been mentioned several times as CC1 in the indictment. Do you think at some stage the Indian government would have to make a representation before the court, or it completely depends to the attorney's office if they want to take up those charges in future?
Right. I mean, it's difficult to say at this point, but clearly there will be now that there's been an indictment, there will be further investigation, and everything will follow from that. And so I think I wouldn't want to speculate overly about what the next steps will be, what demands or expectations there would be of the Indian government. It all depends on how the investigation plays out, and I think that it's also hard to gauge the timeline for how quickly this will move along. The U.S. court system, like many other court systems, can be slow, though these are very serious allegations, so that suggests that they'll be prioritized. But I think that it all starts with how the investigation, when it starts, how it's carried out, and that will then dictate how the Indian government will be asked to be brought in. And of course, if there is an expectation that the Indian government be asked to account for certain things, whether it cooperates in the investigation, that would be another key factor as well. But again, I mean, the trend lines to this point suggest that India, like the United States, does not want to act in ways that could cause harm for the relationship. Though, of course, at the same time, as we all know, and certainly as this audience knows, this is a very sensitive issue. The issue of Khalistan supporters, those that believe in a separate Sikh state. Given the history, given the past history, particularly in the 70s and the 80s, of what India experienced in terms of insurgent violence, I think that India will have some very difficult decisions itself as it figures out how to message its response, how it responds to any legal-related causes, because it, I think, wants to ensure that the relationship with the U.S. is not impacted in a big way, but it's going to have its own interest in terms of how it chooses to go along with things.
Right. Michael Kugelman, Raymond Vickery, thank you very much for joining us. Definitely, this is an important moment in India-US ties, something to closely watch out for as well. We're going to take a short break here on News Center, but up next, delegates and leaders from across the world arrive at Dubai for COP28, the annual conference on climate change. A special discussion on COP28 with Sumant Sinha of Renew and Sherry Madeira of Carbon Disclosure Project on the other side.